welcome back to Crafted Reality, the podcast where we dive into the world of play, story and technology. In this episode, Julian and I debrief on the field, our fragmented audio project that we released in October last year. We dive into audience figures, behaviours and talk about what went well and what we would do differently next time. If you're enjoying the podcast and want to support the work we do, consider heading over to our Patreon. The link is in the show notes. So without further ado, let's get into the episode.
So it's 2025. It's already through nearly the end of February and just perfect timing. We've decided to do a roundup of something that happened in 2024.
I mean, my brain doesn't even kind of remember anything that happened last year.
Yeah, no.
I'm just in 2025 and that's where I'm at.
And we did a few Crafted Reality mini weekly podcasts around about the field when it was kind of happening.
Yeah.
So every week there was an episode of the field, and then to join that was also a mini podcast of around about 10-15 minutes with Hevin, the writer and co-creator of it. So I guess today we thought we would do a roundup of more now retrospectively what we found out, and provide a few numbers and stats in terms of viewership and things like that. During that time, we also launched our Patreon, which we have still ongoing and helps us run both this podcast and the field. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But if someone is listening and they are finding the stuff that we're doing interesting and has value, then we do have a few tiers on the Patreon where you can kind of help support us continue to make content. And any support at this moment in time would be much appreciated. It'd be fantastic. It's quite hard in the industry at the minute in terms of making content and finding projects to do, I guess I would say. So with that in mind, shall we talk about the field and what we found in terms of facts and figures?
Yeah, because I guess you're just invited, I'm looking directly at the camera here now, to our kind of sort of debrief of the project. So looking at, numbers, and people don't generally talk about numbers in terms of audiences that very much. So we thought we would kind of lay out our numbers in all their wonderful glory, as we kind of unpick maybe what those numbers mean, and what they kind of might mean for any future iterations of the field that we might do. So I've looked at the trusty analytics on Spotify, because we mainly published everything through the Spotify for Podcasters platform to then distribute to various different platforms across from Spotify to Apple to then lots of other kind of little mini podcasting services that exist. So we essentially published 5 episodes, the first one being released on the 28th of October.
Yeah. And
then we released those weekly. So the field ran for 5 weeks. So in its entirety, for those 5 episodes, we had, drum roll,
my ears, you can't take it.
Yeah, I was going to bang the table, but I thought, let's not do that. 487 plays.
And so that's as of today, which is the 21st of February.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is, it's difficult to know, is that good, is that bad? I mean, it's better than 10, it's better than 5. And then interestingly, when I looked at the episodes themselves, in terms of the breakdown of that 487, episode 1 out of that had the most listens, which does make sense.
You kind of expect,
right? Yeah. Episode 2 then, again, came in second in terms of the amount of audience listening or engaging. And then we have this gap where episode 5 comes in at third with the third amount of listens, followed by episode 3 and episode 4. So it's kind of like this weird top-heavy episode 1 and episode 2, and then the final episode. But we've got this dip of maybe about, looking at the stats, about 50% drop off. Maybe just just under 50% drop off between where we started to kind of where we had that lull, and then it kind of peaks at episode 5. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts about why that would happen.
I guess in some ways you could. I mean, it'd be really interesting. I mean, not comparing it for other, TV series and radio station series, but I wonder if there's a general, it's the last episode of the season, let me just crib up on it. It's a bit like reading the last few pages of a book, right?
I was just going to say, yeah, particularly in your choose your own adventure, where you're like, I'm just going to go to the end just to see where it lands up, and then maybe I don't need to fill in the gaps in between because I could probably guess what happens.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe that's my only kind of thinking. It'd be interesting to know if anything was going on like half term or something like that within the other 2 weeks, that kind of change routine of people. That might be another reason.
Well, I think in the UK, around the 28th is sort of half term. So I think we released just sort of either at the end or on the cusp of half term. So yeah, maybe people having more time, but then as you said, also something new. So you're going to engage maybe, or make the effort to engage with that first one or second one. And maybe that lull in the middle, you might kind of forget about it. I think we do that, don't we, at home, where we start a new season of something on TV.
Yeah.
We're really engaged, and then because it's weekly and you can't binge.
Yeah.
I kind of think we sort of forget about things and then come back to them. You're like, oh gosh, because I guess our habits have changed where you can binge, whereas I suppose we didn't give people the option to do that, to listen through. It was, I guess we had decided to do a weekly release of the episodes. I wonder if things would have been different if we'd allowed people to binge.
Well, I mean, I definitely think they would have been different. I think we were obviously just talking about that now, and it kind of leads us well into what else we did at the same time. So during every week, there was a release of a field episode, and then there was a mini crafted reality episode that was with ourselves and Heaven. That was kind of talking, hopefully without giving any spoilers away, about how it was made and some of our choices throughout the project. And I think we did that because we'd watched All Mankind on Apple TV, and then we realized they had a podcast that they were also putting out weekly, and it felt quite nice to get a sense of the thinking around the piece that was being made and you were seeing, and then also engage a bit more with the actors and understand exactly what they were thinking or have been doing.
I've got some stats for the Crafted Reality Field mini-series if you're interested in them.
Yeah, so I guess we could have a look at as you say, the stats for Crafted Reality and see if, what would be interesting to see if it follows the same pattern as the others.
What would your guess be? Little trivia for you.
Maybe, yeah, let's go with that.
Okay. So we did, 5 parts to those mini field series on Crafted Reality. So between YouTube and then also release on Spotify, part 1 had 62 views / listens.
Yeah.
And then part 2, 3, 4, and 5 sort of averaged between, I'd sort of say like 40 to 35 to 40 views and listens in total. Okay. So it sort of actually just wasn't half, but it sort of dropped at least 20 listens, views, but they were stable. So we had 37, 38, 41, 31 for the last one. So pretty stable in terms of... But
in a way, a reverse in terms of the 5th one was the least.
The least, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, again, no idea as to why. And I think it would be interesting to understand whether, like you said before, whether we'd have dropped all 5 at once, whether we'd have got more or less views. I think with an organisation that's got very little, if we had no real budget for marketing or anything like that, I think if you chuck everything out all in one, then I think you've really got to do a push that kind of allows you to really kind of make sure that people know that this is going to be launched now and there's going to be all of these episodes available to them immediately. I think the reason maybe we did the weekly is because you've got 5 opportunities to get people to kind of listen. And I think even though we were releasing them on the same day, you still got 4 extra weeks, if you like, to kind of get people hooked in. And maybe that in your head logically makes sense. I don't know. Maybe for us as well, it's maybe a little bit easier to manage. And I think as well, going off of that, it kind of leads us into conversations about the Patreon, as well as the supporting podcast, the nature of the project that we discussed in previous Crafted Realities, but just as a kind of recap. Each episode was made up of what we would classify as scenes, and there were around about 5 to 6 scenes per episode. But we actually made, 6 or 7 more scenes that it's not that they didn't make the cut, they were specifically left out because of the nature of how we build an episode. And those episodes then are now being released into for Patreon, for members of the Patreon, and so they can kind of almost fill in some of the blanks that were left out of the actual. I was going to say Shopify, but Spotify season of episodes and scenes. So I think that's kind of an interesting model. It was something that I guess in a way we came about because of happenstance.
Yeah, and I think we had those. I think we weren't sure initially for the field how many little, I guess, threads we'd put in one episode, and we just landed on 5, because it sort of felt quite a decent amount of time, because that they were all about 2-ish to 3 minutes each. So you're kind of looking at an episode being between 10-15 minutes long. Yeah. So that kind of felt like a nice amount of time for someone to listen. So not too long, but short enough that hopefully you kind of hold your attention for that period of time. So 5 and 5 also felt very pleasing in terms of numbers.
Yeah.
So yeah, we did have this extra content that, as you were saying, is useful to kind of hold back and be able to kind of offer that through a different platform and be something that's quite unique to that particular platform, in this case behind a paywall for Patreon. And just going back to the point you were saying about sort of marketing, I think with small companies like ourselves, it's usually just that one person, me in this instance, doing the social media. So when you've already got...
well as doing the day job as well. It's not specifically just this job.
Yeah. So, and on top of that, you're running your business social media, and then suddenly you've got like a project social media. So you've kind of got these two things that you need to kind of think about having content for. And I suppose as much as you can schedule X amount in, there comes a point where then, what do you put onto the project socials? And then that can become almost then a bit of a burden, but then you sort of, that's sort of your shop window in many respects in terms of for us, for our marketing and for our budget and for the amount of time that we have. That's sort of one of the easiest ways to do it, but it does rely on you building an audience base for that Instagram page or for that Threads account. It just takes time, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I think you can kind of see from the release in October, and then that runs to November, when I had sort of stopped posting on Instagram, which has kind of been maybe this month. I did a little bit in January. You can actually sort of see the drop off a little bit, and there are kind of correlations between when I've posted something on Instagram, reposted it then from the field to Yellow Brick, that there is interest. You can see those spikes, so there is a correlation there. But again, I think it's sort of like thinking about content for those social media platforms that are going to grab people's interest, and then also bring people then ideally then to begin to find the field, listen to the field, and eventually hopefully then look at supporting us if they really like it in a way.
Yeah. And I guess talking about the episodes that were left out, there were 2 episodes that we would probably say ironically were some of the best episodes, scenes that, so some of the scenes that were left out were some of the best scenes that we created. And so many of the Patreons are actually getting some of the best, in my opinion, some of the best scenes. And one of those is the rewind one.
Oh yeah, play, stop, rewind. Which
is a brilliant conversation between two of the best friends in the actual season, Em and Megan. And we're going to play that now. You can listen to it on the podcast here, which is a bit of an exclusive because up until this point it's only been released on the Patreon. So yeah, you can have a listen to that and see what you guys think.
Meg!
Hey,
You okay?
I think the batteries are going flat.
What is that?
Oh, Mum's old Walkman.
Retro.
She used to love this thing.
We'll find more batteries.
Yeah. Sometimes I think I can hear her.
Your mum?
Or feel her. I don't know, it's weird.
You miss her?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I don't know if I do.
Really?
I mean, I love her, she's my mum, but she's never home. Even when that explosion happened, she was away with work. I'm telling you, her job is more important than me.
Oh, don't say that.
I never see her. And when I did, it felt like we were speaking different languages.
Just a blip, that's all.
I don't understand what happened. Me and Mum, we were close, but lately, I just wish I could take this Walkman and rewind time. Because we don't get each other anymore. And when you don't get someone, it makes life really hard.
The thing is, Meg, if everyone in the world just got each other, that would be weird.
Yeah, it would solve a lot of problems.
Do you think?
Maybe. Do you want to go?
All right.
Yeah.
Cigarettes and bitter wine, just some kids underneath that moonlight, getting closer. Yeah, that was back when I could call you mine, holding hands, falling into the riptide, over and over. Yeah, we would take.
So I guess this, and there's a few others that I kind of come in, and I guess you could ask why these didn't make it. And I think it's the nature of what we were experimenting with. We're experimenting with a number of factors where you've got effectively 5 stories chopped up, randomly assigned, fractured. And then you've got a backbone that kind of runs through it, which is the Dr. Peak narrative, which is is the only bit that's chronological, unless it's randomly chronological, And we made some rules and we set this out totally randomly. And I think you could kind of go, oh, well, maybe we just put this one in, this one in, this one in. And
I mean, that was really tempting at one point.
Yeah, for sure. But I think the experiment is all about seeing if this kind of approach works. And I think we've learnt loads.
Yeah.
I think we were talking to Heaven this week about it, and we were kind of debriefing that, and there was a lot of stuff about like hooks of scenes, which feels, we kind of knew that, but also, you know, just kind of how do you make a 2-minute thing that ends in a hook? Were there any things that you thought, having now like seen the 5 in the wild and realizing what was in and what was out, are there any things that you feel that any of your thoughts about it at all?
I think sometimes the randomness actually really worked. There were some scenes that slotted together that they just worked in terms of the tone, in terms of the change of pace, and, you know, potentially we wouldn't have, if we were to curate it, wouldn't have put those scenes, you know. So like really happy happenstance. And then there were other times where it just didn't work, you know. It just the shift just perhaps just didn't have enough interest. Not that I'm saying that each little segment didn't, but, you know, and I think there were some narratives that worked better than others. And maybe that's just my personal preference, that there were certain characters that I felt I really wanted to know more about and identified with. But because you've got sort of those 5 threads, you're not really going to know what you're going to listen to next. And you're not necessarily going to always, because of the way that we fractured the narrative, some of those scenes might have been held back, so you're never going to get the satisfaction of having like a whole picture of that character or that scenario ever, unless, you know, you kind of end up seeking it elsewhere through our platforms. So yeah, there were moments that worked, and then there were moments that just didn't. But as you said, I think that's why we've done this, to sort of understand what are the good bits that you take forward. And I think to a degree there is an element of curation still needed, whereas perhaps the only thing we did create was that one thread, which was the Dr. Peak thread, which sort of was the backbone. But I think the curation of the content, in what I'm trying to say, is just slightly different. Not necessarily maybe having that backbone, but at the end of the episode there is, you know, the big hook that then will hopefully lead you into then the next release the week later, which has enough intrigue and enough flavour to it that you kind of go, oh, I really actually, your brain just remembers sort of that, and then you kind of go, I've got to know what happens next week. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah,
that's kind of interesting. I guess that's another way of indirect. Let's say you still do the same amount. You do 25 scenes, 5 scenes in each episode, and what you've done is there's 5 scenes that you've described as you've just described, like big hooks, and you assign them to the last scene of every episode. You could randomly assign those, or you could choose them chronologically, one or the other. But then you're still allowing the first 4 to be random. So it's a single rule, like Peak was, chronologically through, but it's just a different rule of a way of gluing bits together.
And I think like some of that, then, you know, how much further can you push it in another direction where you fully embrace the fracturedness of it, and then how far do you go in terms of how much do you need for that story. So during season 1 we talked a lot about this sense of ambient storytelling, which we didn't actually really end up doing in season 1.
I'd probably say maybe the dog scene in genuinely was probably one of those moments where it obviously had a narrative to a degree, but the narrative was much lower down the pecking order, and it was more of a feel and a dwell and scene. Keep on going between episode and scene. But
so there is a little segment that is just from the perspective of we call the dog Cliff, and Cliff does appear in quite a few episodes just in the background, so you'd hear a barking dog. So actually
it's the star of the show.
The star of the show. So if you can tell us the number of times Cliff appears in the field, there's a prize for you. Maybe we'll play that episode now, and you can have a listen to that.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I'm not going to sit here and do fuck all.
Glenn! Good luck with your kumbaya bollocks!
Oh, don't you bloody start.
Who've we got here? Let's have a look at your collar. Cliff. Well, aren't you lovely, Cliff? A real little fluff ball. What's wrong? No friends, is it? I know how you feel. Tell you what, Cliff. I'll be your friend. There's a good boy.
I just love that. I think that out of all of the little segments, of the little threads, that, I don't know, there's something really magic about it. It's so visual. And I think, again, we didn't maybe push that enough. I think we, in some ways, played it quite safe with some of the... Well, we played it safe in terms of how we constructed the other scenes, you know, in terms of overall, in terms of the thread, there was a beginning, middle and an end. That's how we wrote the threads and then kind of jumbled them up randomly. Whereas I guess this little moment, which was totally composed, where you could just sort of flow with it, I would think I would have liked to have done more of that. And we, again, that's kind of mean we had talked about this kind of, this sort of sound dwelling in the environment. And that doesn't necessarily mean that people would be within it. Is that interesting? I don't know.
Yeah, if you've listened, do let us know in the comments whether you found what you thought of that scene. Yeah, I think, I mean, you could argue that that scene is fully written, though. So it's almost like its own thread in that sense. So that, you know, so then you're getting into the realm of, and in a way that's what we're trying to do, but then you're getting into the realm of 25 scenes all being written from, you know, that has a start, middle and end. And they will all have that in an element. But I guess there's 25 stories as opposed to 5. So I think there's a choice, I think, and choice being different offerings. So a scene can be independently on its own. It can be 2 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever it is, and you'll never dwell in that scene again. And then you can have a thread that's chopped up into 5 things and scattered throughout the season. And then I'm sure there are other things we can't even think about at the moment that you could have that are kind of dotted or placed within certain parts of a season. Maybe just to kind of recap as to why we are thinking like this in making this work, and why we're trying to make this kind of explore this kind of way. It's pretty much due to social media. It's the idea of the infinite scroll or the 30 or 90 second TikTok. So it's this kind of idea of, are there ways of almost like backward building into audio stories, a way of almost using some of these tools in hopefully in more of a positive, wholesome way to kind of like bring a new dimension to storytelling. And I think, like you said earlier, from scene to scene, some of them were just, I think you would never have had that. And then others, I wonder if you need what you perceive as not working as well as working. Like, because I think the scroll and the other thing are all about this dopamine hit of you linking things together. And I think that's ideally what you're trying to do, isn't it? With the scenes, you're trying to like dopamine hit to link things together, maybe. Yeah,
because I guess sometimes I'm scrolling through
dog TikToks or Instagrams.
Dog. And then suddenly I'm on, I don't know, something totally different, like tablecloths. And it's like, how have I got here?
Yeah.
Which, I get your point. It's kind of interesting to have that kind of clash for your brain to kind of go, it's almost kind of a little bit of a wake-up point of like, how did I get here?
Yeah.
Okay, now I've got to switch gears slightly, maybe.
Yeah. And like you said, if you didn't like a character, well, I mean, we're not necessarily just making... And I know there's a difference between not liking a character in a narrative sense and also just not liking a character, you know, like maybe there's also that as well. Like maybe that's harsher somehow in this kind of approach. I don't know. Like in the fractured nature, maybe you dislike them even more. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's hard to know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a kind of the anti-choose your own adventure.
You
know, there's pathways that you're just getting presented with that this is kind of where you are. And then maybe you will go back to the other thing that you did really respond to. But I suppose it's kind of a bit of a gym workout for the brain in some ways.
And I think for people who do want full closure, again, we're going to deliver the threads in full eventually on the Patreon. So again, if you wanted to listen to Dr. Peake's thread uninterrupted or the Friends threads uninterrupted from scene 1 to scene 5 or 6 or 7 or however many scenes there are, we will be releasing that on the Patreon in the next few months. So again, another reason for maybe considering signing up to it. And again, that could maybe bring another perspective of the piece. And I think that versatility is something that is continually interesting to us in many ways.
Do you want to hear some more stats?
Let's hit us with some more stats, yeah.
Right, so audience breakdown.
Yeah.
So 64% of the audience were female.
Okay.
Identified as female. 34% of the audience identified as male. And then we had 3% non-binary. So, quite a big percentage being female, identifying as female, which is interesting. And then age, 1% 18 to 22.
Okay.
19.6% 23 to 27 year olds.
Okay.
22.7% 28 to 34 year olds. 21.6% 35 to 44 year olds. 25%, this is our biggest audience, 0.8, 45 to 59 year olds.
Okay.
And then 9.3% 60 plus.
Okay. I mean, the ranges that they give are they're quite small, aren't they?
They
which
are,
is good
actually.
to kind of understand those kind of 5-year gaps almost.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
They get kind of wider, 45 to 59, and then of 60 plus is just,
Wow. Harsh.
Yeah.
After that, they feel you're like downhill.
No. We don't want to delve deeper into that.
That'll be us in a few years anyway, so that doesn't matter. Okay, interesting.
So, there's... if you were to take this project forward, there's sort of a decision of whether then you begin to write to your audience, to the 64% who are identifying as female. Do you begin to write to that audience? Whatever I mean by that, I don't entirely know. But, and then also in terms of then the age, it's kind of doing a Dickens really is kind of like flex into what your audience want or who your audience are, absolutely. Now that we've kind of established a listenership.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if it's useful to find out about platforms. 28.3% listened on web browser, 23.8 on Apple Podcasts, and then 19.9% on Spotify, and then obviously there's percentages for other platforms that I've just not bothered listing because they're sort of in the 1-3% on other bits and pieces. And then geographic location, 49.5% in the UK, 34.1% in the US. And again, we've got then much smaller percentages than for other places across the world, Europe and wider. So that's kind of all of the stats I've got to give you, just as a kind of little snapshot of...
Yeah. So I guess the only, not the only thing beyond the readership of the individual, the device in terms of browser, we assume maybe is someone sat on a computer, I think. And then the other ones could be on a mobile phone.
Yeah.
So I guess there's also then that conversation about the cleanness of audio and the scenario and the situation that person is listening in. So I think what we found, and I guess most people will find, is a lot of nuance is lost when you're outside. Unless you have like some crazy good headphones, you are going to get some ambient noise that does affect how you experience it. And I guess the big version of that would be in the car. You know, that is absolutely, a lot of audio is lost. Like you can get the spatial stuff because they kind of have their speakers in the variety of locations, but the engine noise, the tires on the road, all of that kind of stuff really will affect that. So if it was something where we delve in and it does look like a lot of people are listening in a certain way on a certain system, then I think you would also maybe adjust how your audio is being recorded and how it's been made to allow for that to try and make up part of that in some way. I guess the thing is that if we look at how we did season 1, then all of the stuff that we've spoken about so far is kind of irrelevant if we don't do anything with it. So I don't know if you want to talk about something in particular that might make that more relevant.
Well, we're going to do season 2 of The Field.
Okay. Yeah, something like that. That would be good, wouldn't it? Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah, so I guess we've decided to look at create season 2, which, you know, when we were talking about season 1 very early on, we did obviously want to carry the story on. So after this period of reflection, we're going to go ahead and do season 2. It's going to be slightly different this time because we don't have any funding, but because of there being sort of less funds to put towards the project, it's actually looking at creatively how can we work within, I guess, much smaller parameters, but still make season 2 feel very much within the same world, within the same space as season 1. So, some interesting challenges that come with less money. But then I think there's also some interesting things that come from scarcity in terms of the creativity and ways of thinking about how we tackle the narrative and the structure and the story. Yeah,
because I guess in one of our first podcasts we talked about how Yellow Brick started. And one of those conversations was about a street game called Everwake that I'm pretty sure we mentioned we self-funded. So it almost, and Yellow Brick has been over a decade now, I think.
Just over, yeah.
Just over a decade. And obviously that was kind of slightly before Yellow Brick actually formed as an actual company. So it does weirdly feel 10 decades on, which is both
a decade on.
Over a decade on, but which is both, what's the word? It's kind of both not annoying, sad maybe, but also liberating in the fact that Everwake I still think is one of the best things we have made. And I think because it was ours and it was our money, then you have no one to look to.
You're kind of not beholden to the funder, really.
Exactly.
You've got a bit more freedom, I suppose, in many ways.
Yeah, and I think that happened with Everwake, and we definitely pushed the boat out to what we were able to do. And I'm hoping season 2 is kind of like this perfect storm in a way, where we've already done a season whereas Everwake, we just built it from the first game, big game we've done. So we've already done a season. We've got a lot of learning that we'd like to introduce into season 2. Yes, we've got some requirements, like you say, making it more streamlined. But maybe have you got any thoughts as to what you would like to kind of like explore in season 2 at all?
Yeah, I think it's maybe taking a few more risks, because I think, we did do some interesting things with season 1, but I think we could probably push those a little bit further. How fractured can you go? Kind of like this idea of being able to, and we've spoken about this a few times, sort of dwell within a sound space that doesn't necessarily have to be too much
like
of a
pure
structured
narrative, or people talking.
Yeah. So what is that, and what could that be, and what is interesting? Again, a little going back to the cliff scene, the little snippet we played earlier, which was just all kind of composition and left room for the imagination. How can we look at that in different ways? How can we look at sort of different textures within that those narrative spaces? And I think maybe pushing that as far as you can go in terms of like the sort of sonic aspect of it, in terms of sort of distances, in terms of perspectives, and maybe more moments of kind of surprise or things that you perhaps weren't expecting. So how can we twist expectations a little bit more? I think is what I'm interested in this next phase of the field.
So you've been using the graphic novel here as a reference point with a lot of the work we've been talking about, specifically around this kind of feel of dwelling. But I also think maybe the conversation around this staticness of maybe where something could come from, or could be recorded from. There are things, so in here it's literally based on one location, and that the graphic novel explores that location throughout time. So from when dinosaurs are roaming to, I think it will have been based in America, so there'll be Native Americans, then there's an actual house that's been built, and then there's family life within the house. So it's kind of like smashing those kind of things together and almost showing how different yet similar certain aspects have changed, haven't changed, have altered, haven't altered, that kind of thing. But this almost massively extreme documentary style of viewing and, as you said, dwelling. And I guess that comes back to the choice and the decision of the field being in North Wales, that is hugely impressive with its landscapes. You want to dwell in those spaces. You want beyond, like you could sit there in certain places and just be. And so I think that could be interesting to kind of continue for sure. Yeah,
and just linking to that you just said is sort of like that feel. And I don't know if we've mentioned it before in previous podcasts, but this idea of story feeling. So how you feel in response to what you're listening to or reading, can we tap more into that so that you come away with a sense of feel, which I think can be really, really powerful, because you're taking the essence of that story away with you, rather than having to worry about the ins and outs and intricacies maybe of the telling of a story. Can we play more with that within season 2? And what does that mean? What's that look like? How is that structured? So I think kind of playing within those realms, I think, are interesting for me. In many ways, it's kind of quite dreamlike, isn't it? Sometimes you wake up from a dream and you kind of feel something. Well, I do anyway, I suppose, where lots of different things have happened, but you come away with a feeling rather than a kind of any kind of linear sense of narrative, or what happened in that dream. I guess that's my experience of dreaming. So it's that.
It's kind of I guess if we kind of look at the work that we've done up to this point, then if you think of, if we kind of not simplified but kept game and play within that, we thought of that in story terms, then maybe that's story action, and then then there's storytelling, and then this middle thing is kind of like a story feeling, where it's non-action in some ways, but it's also kind of very much active. You're not being told in a not necessarily a negative way. You're not necessarily being told or interacting or listening in that sense. You're listening in a different way. I mean,
it's composition, isn't it, in many ways?
Music and
listening and that kind of
thing.
Yeah, that you gain feeling from that emotion. And I wonder what is the version of that within storytelling. And again, you get that from music in terms of, you can imagine what narrative that
the melody or something like that
is. There's a piece of music that it's called Flight of the Birds. I can't remember the composer, but you can sort of, maybe without knowing the title, Arrival of the Birds, you, even if perhaps you didn't necessarily know the title of it, you do feel that sense of homecoming within that piece of music. It's quite rousing. You can kind of sense that moment then of grounding and landing after flight. So I wonder, is it possible? It might not even be possible. What is that within storytelling? So stripping stuff back to kind of this sonic narrative that does have sound composition, sound effects, or found sounds, and language within that. Not just, I guess we've looked at the English language predominantly within season 1, but what other languages and lyricisms from that language can then sit within this space to elicit a feel. I think is sort of some of the discussions we've been having around season 2. Again, totally experimental. Some things will probably work and some things probably won't. But, it'd be really interesting to try and sort of see what people think about it. So that's sort of like kind of where some of the discussions we've been having with Heaven have sort of landed, and some of the interest I have in the next phase of the project.
Yeah, so I think we're really excited about it. We're maybe hoping that it will. I mean, I'm going to put this in the podcast. So it's going to have to happen. No, but it doesn't really. But I think we're going to try and launch it at a similar time. But,
oh wow, you're putting that out there.
But we'll see. I mean, needs must and things like that. But that's the plan. Try and literally do a season 12 months later. Whether season 2 of The Field is 12 months later chronologically in the story itself, no idea. But definitely kind of would be interesting to see that. And I don't know, I mean, we'd have to have discussions how we release it and things like that. Then that's also up for grabs in that sense. But I guess we've been speaking a lot about The Field this episode. That's not all we're going to be talking about this year. Obviously, it's been quite important for us to talk about it last year, but we're not going to continue talking about it now. And so I thought we'd maybe just last 5 minutes or so of the podcast just talk about plans for 2025 for the podcast.
Yeah, so 2025, we're kind of interested in hearing your thoughts. So if you want to give us some ideas around any themes or any topics that you think would be interesting, you can, if you're watching on YouTube, drop them in the comments, or you can drop us a DM on Instagram, or you can drop us an email, yellowbrick@yellowbrick.co.uk. I'll put all of these into the show notes, because it'd be really interesting to know what you guys want. And then coming up this year, we've got a couple of really exciting speakers. We've got Lisa Halliday-Jones, who's a storyteller and all-round amazing human being who lives in North Wales, that's going to come and join us and talk to us about communities, creating communities and story. We've got Danny Muir, who, again, some lovely human beings, who is a creator, artist, talking about creating and crafting realities and characters on YouTube. And then also Kev Moss, who is a very dear friend of ours, who will be also talking about telling stories within the digital realm. So lots of exciting things coming up. But yeah, it'd be amazing to hear your thoughts about what you are interested in. So please let us know. Yeah, and obviously that goes without saying, but if there are particular people that you'd like to hear from, if we can get them on the show, then we'll try. But yeah, it'd be fantastic to see if there are bits out there that you think kind of would fit the podcast. Yeah, I think that's everything that I was going to talk about today. Well, that's very good. I'm glad. How about you? Yeah, I think that's everything. So once again, thanks for listening. And if you want to show your support, you can find our link to our Patreon, again, in the show notes. Every little helps, as a very well-known supermarket chain suggests. Probably copyrighted that, and we've probably now got to pay them. And then if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe and all that jazz. Ta-ta now. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Crafted Reality. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And if you want to support the podcast and gain access to exclusive content, head over to our Patreon page. Go to the link in the show notes. We'll be back next month, so we'll see you then.